Several years ago in the country of Turkey, a flock of sheep made the headline news. It seems that the shepherds that were guarding the flock were eating breakfast and their sheep began to wander away. Now, ordinarily, this wouldn't have been a problem. It's just that these sheep were close to the edge of a cliff. Suddenly, one of the sheep fell off the cliff and 1,500 more followed it. Now, sadly, 400 of the flock fell 45 feet to their deaths, and the other 1,100 survived merely because the bodies of the sheep that were already dead broke their fall, but many of them were seriously injured. In John chapter 10, verse 12 to 13, we read, "The hired hand doesn't own the sheep and cares nothing for the sheep." The flock really isn't his, so he's not as watchful as he might be towards dangers and things like that. And that seems to have been what happened that day in Turkey. The hired shepherds allowed their sheep to get too close to the edge of a ravine, and the result was devastating. By contrast, Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep." This good shepherd cares enough for his own sheep to even die for them, because they belong to him. Now, back in the Old Testament, there was a shepherd boy, I'm sure you know the story, named David, who took on a giant called Goliath. The king at the time, King Saul, was skeptical about how this would turn out, so he questioned whether David had it in him to do what was required. And David replied, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him." Now, a hired hand wouldn't have bothered with all of that, but these sheep belonged to David's family. They were precious to them, and David was willing to face even death to protect them. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying here. The sheep are precious to him, and he was willing to die to protect them. One of the most touching scriptures in the Bible is when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. It's from Matthew chapter 9, verse 36. Now, throughout the Bible, God calls his people sheep. In Psalm 100, verse 3, "Know the Lord, he is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, and the sheep of his pasture." But the question is, why are we called sheep? Max Lucado, the author of Christian novels, once asked, couldn't God have thought of something better to describe us other than sheep? Of all of God's animals, the sheep is probably the least likely to be able to take care of himself. Sheep, simplistically, are dumb. Have you ever seen a sheep trainer? Have you ever seen a sheep do tricks? Have you ever known of a sheep who could be taught to roll over? Have you ever witnessed a circus sideshow that features something like Mazadon and his famous jumping sheep? No, because sheep are just too dumb. And sadly, they're also defenseless. They don't have fangs, they don't have claws, they can't bite you, they can't outrun you. And that's why a lot of men in particular tend to scoff at becoming Christians. They don't like the idea of following Jesus as their shepherd. They believe that they can survive just as well on their own. Thank you very much. God describes us as sheep because we function best when he leads us, when he is the shepherd. Left to ourselves, we tend to be proud and manipulative and sometimes even selfish. There's often a lot of drama in our lives. I mean, all you have to do is see how the folks behaved during COVID. We went to Pick and Pay. You see the shelves emptied of bread, milk, meat, and why, I don't know, toilet paper. Doesn't trouble these folks if others don't have what they have. They have it and they've stored it up because they seem to have deserved it. These folks are proud, manipulative, and, yes, selfish. But if you get right to the core of things, all of us struggle with things like that. We all struggle with these feelings of pride and selfishness and indulge in manipulating others on occasion. That's why we need Jesus as our shepherd. He leads us so that we can change, so that we can become true men and women of God. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Now, Jesus had all the power in the universe at his disposal, and yet he was willing to die for us. And if we follow Jesus and we allow him to be our shepherd, then he teaches us how to think and how to act the way he thought and how he acted. In Matthew chapter 20, verse 26 to 28, Jesus taught, whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your servant. Just as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. You see, when we follow Jesus the way that we should, then we become a servant of others, just like he was for us. But we'll never be what God designed us to be until we let Jesus become our shepherd. But why should Jesus do this? Why should he want to be our shepherd? Well, he wants to do this because, well, he cares for us. We matter to him. Jesus said, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. I will give you rest. This almost echoes the words of Psalm 23 that we heard read earlier. The Lord is my shepherd. He's a good shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. In other words, he gives me rest. That's why the words of Psalm 23 are so powerful. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Again in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, it says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. In other words, Jesus is always with us. He'll never, ever leave us. I don't know who made this particular comment, but I think it's quite appropriate. The Oriental shepherd was always ahead of his sheep. He was always in front. Any attack upon the sheep had to take him into account first. But now Jesus is our shepherd, and he is always in front. If you will, he is our tomorrows. So whatever struggles we face tomorrow, Jesus is already there. That's the way we need to view Jesus, as our good shepherd. He's always in front. He's always in our tomorrows. And on top of that, Jesus leads us to be there for others. At times like this, you would always be showing Jesus to others. As Jesus said, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. In these difficult times, we can make a difference. We can write letters to folks in a nursing home. We can call our fellow Christians and just encourage them, pray for them. We have prayer chains and things like that. We can call non-Christians and ask if there's anything that they need. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. Now, back in those days, that's not really how people thought about sheep. Unless you owned the sheep weren't really worth dying for, were they? They were just farm animals. They were kept for their wool, for their meat, and more often than not for sacrifice. Repeatedly through the Old Testament, sheep and their lambs were offered as sacrifices for sin. In fact, in Exodus chapter 29, verses 38 to 39, every day of sacrifice began with the offering of a lamb, and every day of sacrifice ended with the death of another lamb. The first lamb was offered at 9 a.m. in the morning, and the last lamb was sacrificed at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Now, those times are quite interesting because when Jesus was crucified, he was placed on the cross at 9 a.m. in the morning, just when the first lamb was offered. And guess what time he died? 6 hours later, at 3 p.m., the time when the last lamb of the day was sacrificed. As Isaiah prophesied, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. As Jesus said, I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. But sheep weren't considered worth dying for, but Jesus died for us. Even though we weren't really worth dying for, were we? Someone once noted, in the Old Testament, sheep died for the shepherd, but when Jesus came, the good shepherd died for us. The story goes of a blonde who was sick and tired of all the blonde jokes and decided that she was going to take matters into her own hands. So she went off and got herself her hair dyed. Now, quite extraordinarily, she also went off and bought a car. Now, to go and test her unblondness, her newfound non-blondness, she went for a drive the one day and she came across a farmer who was looking after his sheep in the fields. And she rushed over to him and said, "Sir, if I can guess the number of sheep you have in your pasture, can I take one of them home?" "Absolutely," said the shepherd. So she stood there and she pondered and she looked around and she came up and said, 382. Shattered, the shepherd said, the old farmer said, "That's exactly right." So he honored his bet and said to the blonde, "You are more than welcome to take one of my sheep." So just before she was off, setting off in her car, the farmer came up to her and said, "I tell you what, if I can guess the color of your real hair, will you give me my dog back?" Now I want to close with this thought. Several times in his ministry, Jesus talked about sheep and their shepherd. One day when the Pharisees mocked Jesus about spending time with sinners, he told them the parable from Luke 15, verse 4 to 6. "What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he lost one of them, does not leave the 99 of them and in the open country and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and the neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my sheep that was lost.' The shepherd left the 99 safe sheep to find that one single sheep that was lost. And once again, Jesus was referring to himself as the shepherd. He was going to leave the 99 to find the one that was lost. And that's why he spent his time with the tax collectors and the sinners. The Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost, it says in Luke. So here's the deal. If you were the only person on earth, if you were that one lost sheep, Jesus would have died just for you. Doesn't matter what you've done, where you've been, how you've lived your life. Jesus is the Good Shepherd, and he laid down his life just for you. The question now is, what are you going to do about it? Amen.